Hey y'all, this is AJ, and I wanted to make this quick video about my reflections on the American Psychological Association, or APA conference here in Seattle 2024. And I really had a great time looking at different perspectives on the field of psychology, the human science, even though there's a lot of animals in it. Um, I will be presenting at the National Association for Gifted Children in November at the conference center, the convention center here in Seattle. And I really felt like I'm using this extended metaphor, but the time in season two of The Bear, when they had to go to the different restaurants to get inspiration for their tasting menu, that's kind of what I did, where this was one of the few conferences that was both in the domain that I'm actually in, but also physically located where I'm at. And it was really a good combination of different sessions that uh, take a look at different parts of policy and practice. So the theme of the conference was all in, and it was a call for the scholarly psychological community to come together with practitioners and policymakers for systemic change that will impact the lives of people. Um, One of the stories that stuck with me was Doctors Mercado and Venta talking a little bit about their experiences with the APA Immigration Task Force and their experiences at the Texas-Mexico border. Dr. Venta recollected a story about one of her patients who was separated from her husband almost immediately at the border, right after crossing, and her husband was detained and deported. And the tenseness of receiving a phone call that could be either a reunification or a separation. And that kind of story is all too common and needs to be shared because this is happening every day. And it, as you can imagine, has a lot of profound psychological impacts on not only the individuals, but entire communities and the people doing this work every day. The next speaker was former US Surgeon General Antonio Novella, and she had a lot to say about the different epidemiological statistics of the US and the policies that really keep these trends in place. She talked a lot about the segregation and criminalization in schools, home ownership, uh, barriers, redlining, blockbusting, lack of access to Medicaid, and food insecurity as one of those things that makes it so that all of the underlying psychological conditions, it's kind of expected. And how we fix these or start to address these more systematically is to tackle the root causes, which are not solely found within psychology. So, you know, there's a lot of work that we need to do. The next topic I want to talk about is building impact ecosystems. And that was a talk by friend of the show and 33rd president of the University of Washington, President Anamari Kause, professor of psychology. And it was a really good talk about how public institutions need to lead the charge in convening communities through research and practice. Uh, it's one of those things where I've heard these speeches a lot throughout my time at the University of Washington, but it is something that I genuinely believe that this is why I came to this institution, the UW. It's one of those things that even though it sounds really corny to people who aren't maybe doing it, or it sounds corny to people who are doing the work, but it is one of those charges that I feel is what actually motivates me as a teacher and researcher, just because it is kind of like there's a lot of other things that I could be spending my time doing, but I will be doing a lot of this work because it is something that I see as something that needs to be done. So she talked a lot about, uh, balancing the timely and the timeless, making our own luck, and really coming together, rewarding collaboration, uh, in order to drive these fields forward. She gave examples in climate change, in racial justice, in early childhood education with the Rainier Valley Early Learning Center project. There's a lot of work that the UW has to do as a public institution, and to also maintain the trust of the public. You could tell the levels of impact were greatly affected by how resources are able to get out into communities. And I do think we need to work very hard to make it so that our resources are distributed a little bit more equitably. The next topic would be creativity and how that manifests across individuals and communities throughout the world, mostly within school settings, um, especially comparing gifted and non-gifted student populations, and then the potentials for looking at graduate, undergraduate, and early career scholars. It is very interesting to see how our education systems kind of both promote and dissuade a lot of creative practices and behaviors. I wanted to talk a little bit about how creativity has been linked to the big five personality traits. And I always remembered it using Ocean Canoe, but this is an initialism for openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. So alumni presenters from the Robinson Centers, Dr. Mamadov and Dr. Lamb, both at the University of Georgia and the University of Alabama, presented on this topic. And it was really interesting to see the profiles that emerge when you look at the big five personality factors and creative self-efficacy scales and different psychological profiles. So there's work to be done in connecting those fields and then operationalizing them within education settings and within the workplace. But it was a good start and a really interesting way of connecting uh, theory into actual what people are doing. The universal design for learning sessions that I went to were they were in the right place. They talked a little bit about student engagement, especially in student learning settings. So student engagement, representation, and expression of how people are able to take a subject and re-express how they're learning it. Um, there were some nuggets where it's like alternative assignments within online ecosystems. So like Canvas or Moodle or Blackboard would be, instead of having discussion board posts, let's have the ability to upload uh, dictations. And that was kind of like you know, one of those. I would like to see how useful that is in terms of student learning and um, student self-report for class evaluations. Like, do they actually like that? Would they prefer to do that kind of stuff? Is it just different, or does it actually support what they're doing? The upside would be that these practices apparently make instructor communication less of a burden, and there's some implications for having to respond to less emails or Canvas discussion topics or questions. Really addresses the teacher burnout aspect, but that's really teacher centered and not learner centered. And I kind of want to see how UDL is actually employed there, or if it's just being a better teacher makes you less, you don't have to respond to as many things when you're clear about your course policies.